So we've defined meiosis as the creation of gametes, but specifically in humans, we call this gametogenesis. So Genesis, remember, like the book in the Bible, that means creation. This means creation of gametes. In males and females, this means different gametes are made. For males, they're called spermatozoa. And that's the plural. The singular is spermatozoan. For females, the plural is ova, the singular is ovum. These are our Latin-based words. Simply, we're talking about sperm and eggs. Here you can see the two different processes. They have different names depending on what gamete is being made. We either have spermatogenesis, or on the ovum side, we call it oogenesis. And I know that's strange, but we do pronounce both of the O's there. And you can see there are some slight differences between the male and female, so we'll just quickly go through them. In a male, this process occurs only when a spermatogonium, when the initial cell, that is diploid, 2N up here, goes through the process of meiosis, the first meiotic division, causing or resulting in secondary spermatocytes that are haploid, N. And then after meiosis 2, we have 4 of these that are still N. So we have our initial cell, which is 2N. We have our primary spermatocyte, which is still 2N. It undergoes meiosis 1, that you can see in tiny print right there, to create an N, two haploid cells, secondary spermatocytes. And then it undergoes meiosis 2 to make 4 spermatids that are also haploid. Now at this point they're called spermatids until a couple more things happen. One, at the front end of the sperm, or at what would be considered the front, or that portion, it develops some enzymes that are intended to help with fertilization. And then we add a flagella on the end that allows for the sperm to be more motile, so more mobile. It pushes them forward or propels them. Looking at this process in a male human occurs only after puberty. So none of these things happen until puberty, and then this will happen in the testes of a male. This process results in 4 equally sized sperm. It's important that they're equally sized because a male is going to produce millions of sperm over the course of a very short amount of time. So 4 at a time are made, they're all equally sized, and they're all fairly small because they have to be particularly mobile to travel the 10 centimeters in length to reach the final destination, which would be fertilization, which is the goal for any of the sperm that are made. This is in contrast with our ovum, which are slightly different. So here we're looking at oogenesis, and it happens in a slightly different way. In a female, this first portion right here, from our initial oogonium that is 2N to our primary oocyte that is 2N, that process happens when the female herself is a fetus. So this happens at about 20 weeks of gestation of a female's life. So she's born with all of the primary oocytes she'll ever need in her lifetime. So this is before birth. That it actually arrests in prophase 1. Prophase 2 isn't going to start again in any primary oocyte until ovulation of a particular month of a female's menstrual cycle, so in puberty. So all of this, the rest of this, isn't going to happen until a female reaches puberty, and it happens with 1 or 2 oocytes at a time. So much different than the way it happens for a male. You'll notice after meiosis 1 completes, we have two very different sized daughter cells. We have one large one and one small one. The large one is our secondary oocyte. The small one is called a first polar body. After meiosis II occurs, meiosis II right there, after that occurs, we end up with one very large oocyte and three very tiny cells with the correct amount of DNA, but not the right amount of cytoplasm. These three tiny cells here are called polar bodies. Now this seems a little bit strange, but the reason that this happens actually makes quite a bit of sense. Over the course of the lifetime of this egg cell, of this ovum, it's going to have to travel about 1 inch or 2.54 centimeters until it reaches what would be its final destination if fertilization were to occur. That means that the egg can be a little bit larger, it can be heavier and provide all of the cytoplasmic material and all of the organelles and all of the other stuff, the cytoplasm, all the stuff that is in a cell. The egg cell is going to provide all of that. And in order to provide enough for a living, growing being, it has to be a fairly large cell. That means that those other three polar bodies are going to not have as much cytoplasm to guarantee that for every round of meiosis here, you get one viable, usable egg cell. Now, this process we said happens during puberty. It is not impossible for rather than an oocyte to be fertilized, for a polar body to be fertilized instead. It has all of the necessary DNA, but it doesn't have enough of the other material to create a viable life. So if that happens, if a polar body is fertilized rather than fertilizing an oocyte or an egg cell, we call that a blighted ovum. Blighted meaning deprived. It's deprived of any of the other cytoplasmic materials that it would need in order to create a viable living human being. When that does happen, it typically results in miscarriage, and that life would, from then, essentially pass away because it wasn't able to be viable because of the lack of materials. So that's essentially gametogenesis, the creation of sperm or eggs, depending whether the individual is male or female, happens at different times and in slightly different ways, but the material, the nuclear material, is going to divide the same either way based on what you already know about meiosis.